Islam is a disgusting, evil, violent, stupid religion for imbeciles. And you know what? If somebody is under the sound of my voice right now hearing this on the internet and you're a Muslim, you know what? Then instead of getting mad that I'm calling you stupid, pick up this book and read it and see how stupid it is. And then pick up this book and let the tears roll down your face and say, this is the Word of God. It's got power. And then pick up this book, Islam, there's no comparison. And then pick up this book, following God. And then pick up this book, this is the Word of God. And then pick up this book. You know what's hateful? The gospel.
High-ranked district, here he goes, crossing himself. Oh! He's done.
All right, welcome everyone to another edition of Hot Program. I am your host with the most, all the way from the East Coast. And as always, folks, I am in airplane mode, and now a man who would give the authors of the Gospels Nobel Priest Prize if such a thing existed, a man who needs no introduction. How are you doing today?
I am excellent, and I'm broadcasting from my guest bedroom since my guest moved out. So doing well, having a good Sunday, and just trucking along here.
So the Nobel Peace Prize, I think maybe the gospel writers deserved it because we're still dealing with their gospels all these thousands of years later, which is kind of, Karianne, that's kind of related to the topic today because we're going to review the Mythvision video with Dr. Richard C. Miller, called Biblical Studies is a Circus Show. You know, when I hear biblical studies, I really do feel like it's kind of a debunked field. It's a bit weird. I'm wondering where he's going to take this, but certainly theology is not considered the major academic discipline at public universities that it used to be. Mm-hmm. Matter of fact, if you look at the course catalog of most state universities, you won't find that. Like, they may have something what accounts to a religious studies program. Typically, that's like a graduate school thing. It's going to be more your comparative religions, history of religions, philosophy of religion type situation, right? Mm-hmm. To me, you're going to have to go to a seminary, a theological school, or some kind of Christian university if you want sort of that theology experience, or we're going to sit around and do biblical studies are the way we think of it. Like, you know, like my grandfather has a PhD in theology, right? But he went to some Pentecostal Bible college. But yeah, what? Just playing word association games because we haven't reviewed the footage. What do you think when you hear biblical studies?
I think there's a few camps involved in biblical studies. They're the people who are trying to understand it as literature. The people who are trying to understand it from a cultural perspective. What did this mean to the people of its time? And maybe what does it mean to people today? And how the two don't fall in sync. how they mismatch, right? Because
Right.
I can go to the local Methodist church and ask them, if I ask the priest, hey, what time are you sacrificing the goats? He's going to look at me, we don't do that here. And I probably could go to the local synagogue and say, when do you
Right.
sacrifice the goats? Well, we don't do that here. We don't do that anymore. There is no temple. Then you have the people who are leaning on the everlasting arm of God, trying to sort of make it make sense in the spiritual sense of what the Bible says. And then there are people like me who are kind of, I see it as a lot of fan fiction. And my interpretation to our constant viewers is, it's no secret to them that I think it's a scam. I think it's a huge scam. I think it's always been a scam going back to its earliest days, in a way to pull the wool over the eyes of the people. And in some cases, bring them into cultural alignment so what the Hebrews could survive in their groups. And at other times, just to take their money.
So it's kind of interesting things like that whole first category I see as really legit scholarship that should still be done. Matter of fact, like the observation about biblical studies programs is just that, like, it's an observation. It isn't like it isn't necessarily a prescription, right? Because, you know, I could argue even as an atheist that it's not good for biblical studies programs to go away, because we won't have those programs to help us understand it as literature or culture or history and all that. And to me, that fits almost in with the last group too, because similar to the way you may or may not be into Harry Potter fan fiction, but y'all know where I'm going with that. Setting your feelings about J.K. Rowling aside, or Lord of the Rings fan fiction, or any sort of other epic work that, you know, has its own whole, you know, cultural significance. You know, you could just like people study Shakespeare to this day, right? And I mean, personally, I don't read Shakespeare. If I pick up a Shakespeare and start going at it, it's just going to feel a bit antiquated. But certainly, there's a legitimate place for it to be studied. But yeah, you know, maybe not so much people sitting around actually, literally trying to articulate the history of Romeo and Juliet, right? Because that's where you'd get into that sort of other weird category. All right, let's jump into this, man. Let's see what they're talking about. We'll take off on this, gang.
Dr. Richard C. Miller, you have 3 master's degrees. You've gone through various ranks from Princeton University.
Also, Oppie, thanks for coming through and appreciate you letting us know you're from Sydney, man. It's good to be broadcasting. We're all over the world, folks.
University,
Really
you've been
cool,
to Yale,
really cool.
You've been to various colleges, Fuller, you were theologically minded, you were a very devout Christian. So you know what New Testament scholarship is. James Charlesworth, you've really dug deep into the various schools, from the Christian Reformed, N.T. Wright types, to the maybe more serious James Charlesworth types, to the Allisons, Dale Allison Jr.'s, and all the way now to what you would say is the peak of classicist, non-faith requirement type, just research and the real historical, like, don't have limitations on what you can draw, etc. What is the problem?
All right, hang on. Before he goes into that, let's let me be a jerk here. Let's go through this first minute again.
I like the question, what is the problem?
What is the problem? Like right off, right?
Yeah.
N.T. Wright types, to the maybe more serious James Charlesworth types, to the Allisons, Dale Allison Jr.'s, and all the way now to what you would say is the peak of classicist, non-faith requirement type, just research and the real historical, like, don't have limitations on what you can draw, etc. What is the problem?
Love that.
The problem. Well, let me talk about some of the manifestations of the problem. Maybe we can get back into the problem by talking about that. Well, let me first start by saying I am not a member of SBL at this point. I don't believe it is a valid discursive framework for this field. I think it's very important to pick your discursive partners very carefully, those that share the same kind of foundation in terms of what you're trying to do in your project.
All right, so SBL is the Society for Biblical Literature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it says they support the critical investigation of the Bible. But yeah, let's see what he says about it.
And so I'm very much an evidence-based, evidence-grounded. I try to, as much scientific rigor as I possibly can. I use that term in a broader sense than the hard sciences, but I try to put as much rigor as possible around my work and to not let other frameworks, religious intents, modern feuds about what this means, or any other particular conflict of interest get involved in any way, or even to worry about what that may mean for anyone else. I feel like when I go to SBL, that is not the project. When people are showing up, half of them with name badges from schools where they're required to sign doctrinal statements and confessional creeds.
And boom, we got to talk about this. This is one of the academic things I do like getting into, because like these are the same people that are usually taking shots at evolution. It's the creationist type. But man, your institutional reputation matters. And I just have to say that when you sign a statement of faith, it undermines your scholarship. And this is that sentiment just encapsulated it so perfectly. You show up at an academic conference, everybody typically, your gang, your name and your academic affiliation are basically one and the same. I'm sitting here looking up the same thing right now with Richard C. Miller. I'm like, what school is he at? Who is he? And I'm sitting, it's funny, like I'm looking at the man in front of me. Derek is my friend. He's talking to Derek, and I'm still like, I don't know who this man is until I know what institution he works for. That's just how it is, gang. We're like, who are you and who pays your checks? And so, like, everything I go to, it's, hi, my name's Jay Bundy. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior at the University of Minnesota. Go Gophers. That's how you introduce yourself. I literally just wrote a student a letter of recommendation. Do you guys know what the first thing you need to do when you're writing a student a letter of recommendation is? You need to get out the goddamn letterhead, right? Because people need to know who are you and what school are you coming from. Yeah. And so when somebody has a statement of faith and people know that, literally when they show up, when they see your badge, they're just already all types of question marks around everything you do. And it's not because people are jerks. It's just because your school makes you sign a statement that makes your academic integrity very, very questionable. And then this is something I think Derek gets into, because I know he's talked to people like David Fitzgerald about this, where he tried to do research on the number of these programs that force you to sign a statement of faith. And there was just some very interesting results. First off, I don't want to mention the numbers, I don't remember the exact numbers, but the overwhelming majority do make you sign a statement of faith. And then what was crazy was the number would be way higher if it was the people that like didn't hide it. Like a lot of these institutions basically hide the fact that they make you sign a statement of faith. So like that's problematic, or it's just like in their mission and values. So it's kind of one of those deals where they don't make you sign a statement of faith, but if you sign anything that goes against it, that's like immediate grounds for dismissal or whatever. And then, also, something that people might not think about is then the professional associations. That's why he's talking about like SBL. I'm sure like there are other times where you may not work at a university that requires you to sign a statement of faith, but you may rely on publication in a particular biblical journal or working with a particular biblical professional society, and they may require you to sign a statement of faith. And so, you really want to make sure when you're dealing with a biblical scholar that you're aware of all these potential entanglements and that you clear on where they're at.
Many of them would get fired. In fact, I would say most of them,
absolutely,
if they took my book seriously and to the extent of even agreeing with me, that would be hazardous for many, many, many careers. And so, to me,
thank you so much,
that is
Derek.
not a
That's fucking
discourse.
awesome, man.
So already 50%, just
Can you pause it?
no real
Talk
numbers
about it?
here, but
Yeah.
Okay, there's always a scripture. Matthew chapter 5, 34 to 37. Jesus says, "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." Now, if you just read your own book, folks, these universities shouldn't have to make these people sign that statement of faith. Ken Ham at his ARC park and amusement parks shouldn't have to make people sign a statement of faith. This is their guy. I didn't make Jesus up because I can improve on him. I didn't make Jesus up. Somebody else did. And he's saying not to do what they're asking people to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's funny when you put it that way. I wonder if any scholars ever tried to use a biblical defense.
I'm sure they got a nice Kenneth Copeland style. You shut your mouth. You stop that.
But I would love to be a fly on the wall for those word games after that, though.
Huge percentage of what is considered serious academics. These aren't even evangelicals. These aren't even fundamentalists. These are like what are considered real academics. Like 50% of them, right? They have to sign a statement of faith. I'm not going to name a person. I interviewed a person, and I'll just say that. I don't want to do this because I care about people who I was interviewing. They said some things about Jesus being wrong, about apocalypticism, okay? They've asked me to please remove the interviews from YouTube because they're trying to get a job, and the job was going to be at a church for them to teach.
Yeah.
I had no problem doing that for them because I care about people more than I care about an argument on YouTube or I'm more of a people person than people realize about the whole, you just want to debunk Christianity. Look, I got friends who are Christians, but they did not want to answer certain things on camera that they were willing to tell me in private. Yeah. And that alone made me even go like, what? And I know we're sounding a bit conspiratorial here, but I want to start off, this isn't a conspiracy when you have like the Mike Laconas, for example, who literally take that Matthew 28 zombie apocalypse as allegory because he can't accept that as historical for good reason. Yeah. And he gets fired from his evangelical college. But SBL typically has people who aren't in these evangelicals, some might be, but most, from what I understand, are some prestigious schools like Princeton.
Yeah.
Yale, maybe at Yale, some spots. I don't know. What's the problem with that, Dr. Miller? Can't they just sign their confession and get to the truth?
Well, so let me give an analogy. You're going to have a heart surgery. Now, how much witch doctorism do you want involved in that procedure?
I've had 2 heart surgeries. I can speak on that.
Right. Now, when I put that forward, you want...
Exactly, none. And also, this is what I mean about Christians just can't have an honest conversation about Christianity. As soon as you got to remove the video, you can't answer certain questions. And I understand doing it as a courtesy to a former guest. You certainly don't want, people, losing their jobs over interviews on your channel. But it's just the type of thing that it bothers me that it doesn't bother Christians. It's just, and I don't really accept it. Like I kind of reject the naive Christian stereotype that I think is common in America. I think Christians are aware of the problems with their faith in many cases.
Yes.
They're just committed to overlooking it for Jesus. You know, that's somehow the greater good or something.
Well, I think we have to, let's say the person Derek is referring to who he took the videos down for. If that person gets that position in that church, then they are now there to answer questions and answer them honestly. And a person, let's say the questioners in the classroom for this person are like me, where I'll show you, like, hey, it says right here in the Bible, it says this. So how do I reconcile what is unlikely with what Scripture says? You know, for me, as I would sit back in the class, I'd raise my hand. I'm like, well, look, I can show you elsewhere in the Scriptures where it says people are going to rise from the dead. And that essentially, for me, the Gospels are like a treasure hunt where they're just checking off a list of things that were supposed to happen. Well, they must have happened somewhere because we got this Jesus guy that's supposed to be the savior. You know, this guy, again, in my opinion, a cult leader, if he existed, is just, when they're writing the stories, well, all these other things must have happened. They simply must have. It must be true. You know, I can show you why the disciples are fishermen. I can show you that. It's not even, it's in the Old Testament. It's not in the New. They will be fishermen. You know, there's
right.
all these little details that when you don't know they're there, it can feel so true. It can feel so genuine. It doesn't lose its power in terms of kind of giving you some guidance on how to live, just because it isn't true, just because it isn't factual.
Sure, I just don't think it's I don't even think it can get the guidance to live thing anymore. I mean, this kind of fits into the conversation about is it rational to believe? And there was a time when it was, right? There was a time when it was rational to believe the world was flat. There was a time when it was rational to believe that diseases were caused by dirty air. It's no longer, so somebody could still think that, but we wouldn't say that that's a good guide. And I think that that's becoming more and more true about religion, where like people will say, oh, it's you know, it's a good, you know, it'll make you a good person, or there's a good moral to the story. I actually think the story is inherently immoral. Like, it's an evil story. What's the moral of the story? The moral story is about sacrifice and substitutionary atonement and vengeance and blood magic, and you know, I don't particularly find that a good story. And then given, you know, Jesus himself, right? Like, who talks about sin. It's like, sin isn't a thing, grow up. You know, he's condemning people for their immorality over things we wouldn't consider immoral anymore. He tells slaves to obey their masters. So I mean, I just give people that now. If you tell me you have biblically based morality, I'm like, awesome, cool for you. Now I know you're a monster. But yeah,
Well,
I agree with you to your
fair.
point that like that stuff is still there. Like, if that's what you use it for, but.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm saying whatever the value people get from it is that value, even if, you know, like, you know, the history isn't real or whatever. I'm just saying personally, I don't accept that. Like most people, I get that I'm rare. Most people think somebody walks up to you, they tell you they believe in the Bible and they believe in Jesus. You file them away as good person in your brain. My brain doesn't work that way anymore.
Well, let me tell you. So inside, I'm next to my garage, in this room, next to my garage. I have a wall in my garage that has hammers on it. I have masonry hammers when I do masonry. I have regular, like a ball peen hammer. I have mallets. All sorts of stuff for hammering things. The purpose of those tools, except for the masonry hammer, is to knock things into place. Whether it's a nail or knock things out of place. If it's like a ball joint and I'm removing it or something like that, that's what those things do. And for many people, religious arguments are the same thing. If your kid is acting up, you throw these scriptures at them and it'll knock them into place. You hope. You're trying to get your spouse to stop drinking, the Bible's supposed to knock them into place. And that's what it's, in a way, it can be, it's how it can be used. I don't know that it's what it's designed for. But
Right, but that's what I'm saying. And just like that, it's like using a hammer to construct the World Trade Center. Right, it's
not the only tool you need.
Right, it's too primitive of a tool for the job. We now have more advanced tools, and I'm not, you can show up with your hammer, but I'm going to show up with like a, 80-foot power crane and all this other type of stuff. And that's how I look at it. And that's literally to me. They're like out there, they're out there they're gonna build a pyramid out of toothpicks, and I'm just like. Sure. Right. Let's get into this because we can have this conversation all day.
You want the kind of rigor that you would get, like, say, at Stanford Medical Center or UCLA, real people doing real scientific work that are not interested in some kind of hocus pocus idea about health or, the spirits being involved or any of these kinds of things. That's what I'm after. I'm a Carl Sagan kind of person. I want to know. I don't want to believe. I want to know. So that's what I'm after. That's not the discourse that I saw all the way even up to the top, even at Yale Divinity School. And I don't mean to criticize those places. I know that they are well-intended people, and I learned a tremendous amount from any number of them all along my journey. But at this point, that discourse is not helpful to me. It's in the way. In fact, it's even offensive.
All right, this is about to get good, but I'm happy he says it because, again, I think first off, I think there are real power dynamics that need to be investigated here. I know a lot of the right wingers would like to depict universities as these like super liberal woke places, but the reality is the financials of most universities are super conservative, and they rely on rich donors who, like most of us know in other sectors, a disproportionate amount of the wealthy people are concentrated in the conservative space. And then on top of that, there's the sort of like bold-face anti-secularism of even having something like a divinity school. This is what I mean. Michigan State doesn't have a divinity school. Penn State doesn't have a divinity school. University of Minnesota doesn't have a divinity school. Again, it's one thing to talk about we're going to have a religious studies program, comparative religion, understanding, the literary traditions, all of that type of stuff. But to me, to even like still be propping up this notion of, studying divinity, it's a bit like the Yale's. It's a bit like having a Hogwarts in the middle of Yale, if that makes any sense, right? Like they still have their traditional school of hocus pocus, and the reason I bring this up too is because I think it would be good to see them go more the way of the other secular institutions, but of course they're super private, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of what you're wondering there is, what's the real pushback? What are the real political factors keeping it in place? What would the narrative be like if they did try to move away from that? So this is a really interesting point he's bringing up, and I just wanted to mention that because it's about to get juicy, it sounds like.
And so anybody that's operating from trying to answer historical questions when they, having the answers before they may even know the questions, that's not a scientific approach.
He said offensive, y'all.
We have to call that something else. I don't even know what that's madness in my view.
Madness.
And that's really what's going on. And people
Good.
So for this point, I think what is important here is he says it's not a scientific approach. I think that is a key remark in the entire discussion. When Frank Turek gets up there and starts talking, obviously, to some degree, he's a bit of an entertainer. Is he taking a scientific approach to his faith? No. No. The evidence that matters the most is the evidence that supports his arguments. And it's almost as if the other arguments cannot be entertained. And I have wondered when I've seen him speak, I'm like, how many of these people are plants? Like they were told to get up there and ask the question as if they're a non-believer, so he can knock it out of the park for Jesus and give a fantastic answer that so humbles the person asking the question that they sort of lower their head and walk away.
Right.
But that guy, you know, hey, thanks for coming up and asking that question. I appreciate it. He's part of the local Ratio Christi or something for that university or Campus Crusade for Christ. No problem. And the rest of us watching this video, we aren't made aware of that. In a way, that's unfair. Well, that theater that he's providing, if that is the case, or when that is the case, is unfair to the discussion. Right. Again, it's not scientific. And the people who worked on my heart twice and put my defibrillator in there, they're pros. They're pros. For a person like me and needed that procedure, there isn't a better place to be. No guy came in with feathers sticking off of his body and, you know, humbled a few words over at me and smiled at my body. And then he slit a chicken's throat and poured the blood down my throat, saying, oh, he's going to be just fine. You guys go ahead. I've done my part. And then he goes, you know, to the outside and smokes a cigarette while I'm in there being operated on by people who know what the heck they're doing. That isn't that. There weren't Christians that came to me, like at the end of Mark says, they didn't lay their hands on me and heal me. Unless there were Christians in that surgical theater where they operated on me who were like, we know exactly what to do. This is routine, right? A couple hours and we're out of here. Or we'll bring in another person and do the procedure on them after we sterilize the room again, you know?
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, and we're just having this conversation, right? We didn't review this or anything, so it's you know, we're just getting our thoughts out in real time. Thanks for that comment, Derek. But like, this really does get to me, like, because if Michigan State University had like a school of divinity or something, I can imagine there would be a lot of pushback. And I am genuinely wondering about how the privateness of some of these older, more elite institutions with these incredible endowments, in a sense, allows them to not have to get with the times. And the problem is they're still supporting the Frank Tureks, right? Because there's people who are going, I got a degree from Yale School of Divinity, I've got my PhD, and you know, they don't look or sound like Frank Turek, but then they're going to provide sort of academic cover for the type of nonsense he does. The other thing is with the Frank Turek instance in particular, of course, there's a lot of plants that makes me think of professional wrestling, like when somebody comes out of the crowd or whatever, that person is always a professional wrestler. But a lot of times, if you can't do it with plants, you can just do it with strategic editing, right? And then the other thing they can do it is just with demographics. Like, you know, the man on the street interviews is compelling because it looks like a Christian just walked up to an atheist just to strike up a conversation, and the atheist is woefully, you know, unprepared. But part of it is it's a middle-aged man, you know, with his own education and nonsense, and certainly well-versed in how to be manipulative rhetorically, and he's walking around a college campus, you know, asking questions to freshmen who literally have never paid a bill in their life, some of whom don't even do their own laundry. And literally this is the first 6 months of them not living at home with their parents, right? And so, you don't have to necessarily plant them, right?
Talk to that freshman in 4 years.
Exactly.
Right after they've been there, like, hey, look, Ray Comfort, I couldn't answer your question then, but I sure can now, and I got bad news for you. You're a liar. You may not know it, but you're misleading people. You know, Rick Comfort obviously is not the paragon of scholarship in anybody's book, least likely even in his own book. He's just regurgitating arguments that he's standing his ground. He's not trying to persuade anyone. He's trying to literally, his name isn't part of the deal, comfort those who are reading his materials. You know what? Your Christian faith, just as you have it, or maybe strengthen it a little bit, but it's okay and it's right and it's beneficial and more people need it. So share your faith. Keep the flock growing. And I don't mean flock in a derogatory way.
Right, but that is it, yeah.
Keep the faith growing. We need more people who believe in God and Jesus in the particular way that we would assign to them, biblical or not.
Absolutely. That's what it's about. And that's what bothers me is I'm now thinking about the money behind that effort.
Or entering this discussion, already determining what the conclusion needs to be before they even begin, and then going back and trying to marshal the evidence to get there. And to me, that is the dark ages.
It's apologetic.
I have no tolerance for that. And so I love the people, but I have no respect for that approach. And so you don't see me arguing a whole lot with anyone in my book. I try to treat everyone with respect and dignity. I'm not interested in feuds and, shoot out at the OK Corral or anything like that. I'm interested in the human plight. And I almost had to write this for an audience that doesn't exist now, where the discourse isn't broken, maybe in 100 years or something like that. And so that's kind of so when you talk about mainstream scholarship, you're talking about SBLs, big tent. Okay, and that means let's invite everyone. Now, already you've just exited the academic world.
Yep.
At least in terms of what secular academia means. Let's invite everyone and have them equally able to give presentations on this and that topic. And it ends up becoming a negotiation, a cultural negotiation in our time between faith and these historical methods that we're trying to apply to the Bible.
Oh, this is so good. This is so good. This is so good. But gang, this is what's happening in our wider society, right? And we live in times where, I hate to say it, but us secular people, we kind of represent the scientific or properly academic side of things. And that applies to us whether we're academics or not. And it's kind of something, there's never time to harp on. And that's actually why I like doing reviews of things, because you have a different perspective as a reviewer of something than you do when you're participating in the discussion. But this, to me, harkens back to his example, which he could have maybe expounded upon more, where he says, how much witchcraft or whatever do you want involved in your heart surgery, right? The obvious answer for most of us is none.
I do like a good show. I ain't gonna lie.
Sure. So you might like Hocus Pocus in your dinner theater, right? But probably not in your heart surgery. And most people are that way. We rely on science to make our watches work and to make our video games go. We want our teachers teaching, history as written in from the history books and not from propaganda or fairy tales. And so, but we still like even now, right? Like I remember a moment that speaks to this when I was watching Dr. Walensky from, I believe, the NIH, National Institute of Health, talk about COVID. And they were sort of lowering the recommendations of, how long you stay at home and mask wearing and all of this type of stuff. And I remember Dr. Walensky saying, these new recommendations are based largely in part on what people can tolerate. And I'm sitting there going, how about you give us what we need to do based on the science, and then we work on getting people to tolerate what we need to do scientifically.
Well, as you've heard me say numerous times, you can train a society to do pretty much whatever you want them to.
Yeah,
it's not even hard, especially not now with all the how easy it is to communicate with people.
But what they were saying was that we needed to compromise between, the people who wanted to do these things and the people who didn't. In other words, it was the cultural negotiation, right? That's what she was saying. She was saying we can't just go with the science, and we can't just go with what the pro-science people say. We have all these people who don't want to take the vaccine, and they don't want any mandates, and they don't want to wear masks, and they don't want to social distance, right? And since everybody's going to sit down at the table together, we've got to come up with a compromise plan that everybody can, right? But so this is what I'm saying. This is what's happening it's happening in our conversations about energy. It's happening in our conversations about the economy. It's still happening in our conversations about who won the goddamn election. Like, we have literal people who swear allegiance to Donald Trump and, play the whole "that's not my president" game. It's just really weird. It does really bother me that there's just so much of this going on.
Well, I want to. I'm not going to quote Dr. Miller exactly, so I'm sort of paraphrasing. Dr. Miller commented that he wrote this book for an audience that doesn't exist. Did he say almost doesn't exist, or doesn't exist yet or anymore? I forget how he said.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't exist yet, maybe. Yeah,
okay, doesn't exist. Okay, yeah. That is a key comment.
Yeah, it really was.
In terms of biblical studies, because there is a spectrum. There are gradations of people's faith. There are those people who do approach the Bible with an analytical mind. When I was a Christian and I was reading the Bible, I didn't use my analytical skills to interpret what I was reading most of the time, because I was taught that this is sacred, it's special, you're not supposed to change it, you're not really supposed to interpret it. The Holy Spirit will tell you what to think. Okay, but I then started going to various churches, and I learned that people, and you can see this on YouTube without going to churches, how different people will interpret the very same things in different ways. And someone will say to you, "Oh, that means that it's a living text, you see. As you grow and learn, the Bible grows and teaches with you." That is a spectacular thing to say.
It's a beautiful lie.
Well, look, a person's ability to mature is wonderful. It is essential. Our desire for understanding, and later what comes along to teach others, right? You want to see others grow and mature and learn. It's very satisfying to watch someone get what you've been teaching them. So that's part of it too. But his comment also reminded me of the book of Enoch, which says that what Enoch is saying is not for his generation, but for a remote one. It made me think of that too. And I think at the time of the Gospels, when they were written, that was supposedly the time when all these other events were to be coming to fruition that Enoch was speaking of, if they hadn't already, or something similar that you can say, well, that's close enough, hadn't come already. So I think with Dr. Miller's book that he's written, there's going to be an audience, or there already is an audience that is ready to receive it. But now I guess my question for Dr. Miller, and if you're still in the audience, which needs to happen first? People need to see your book first, or do they need to see the Bible first and then come to your book later to have a reasoned approach to studying the material?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we're stuck. I think we're in a period where religion is plainly falsified. I think there's obvious there's no God. It's obvious that the Bible's not true, but that isn't the cultural narrative. And so I think what he's kind of saying is, like early evolutionary biologists and people like that, who, they could see what the evidence was suggesting, and they could write about it. They were still trying to work through the language of it, but at the same time, the sort of the temperature in the room wasn't ready to really, move the field along. There wasn't even a biology back then. These guys were called naturalists, and naturalism was still an offspring of philosophy, right? These were the people, they were natural philosophers, right? So when you lived in the world of natural philosophers, you could not speak about biology the same way we do today. And I think that's because think about it. He and this is where I'm at. I mean, for me personally, like even I was early enough to like have a different career, right? Like there was a time in my life, people might not be aware of this, but like I worked at a church, right? And there was I did want to go to law school, but there was a time I considered not going back to Penn State, or like I wanted to like finish my degree online maybe, because I wanted to continue working at a church. And I was doing well, and I knew I sort of had good prospects politically and legally, and I enjoyed working at it as a community organizer, and so that path was there, right? And my advisor wouldn't allow that. He was like, I'm not going to let you finish your degree in social dynamics unless you come back. So I went back. I started doing research. I got super into research. I decided I was early enough in my career, hey, I don't necessarily have to go to law school. I can actually go to grad school. I can get a PhD in STEM. Mm-hmm. Right? I can become a scientist. I can become an actual researcher. So that shift could happen in my lifetime, right? But for a lot of people, they're older, right? They finished schooling while they were still in the faith, and now they're fully Bible scholars, and it's harder for them to make that shift. But furthermore, society has not made that shift. So yeah, I definitely get that feeling, because I felt that way. Well, like when I was in a church, I remember being surrounded by good Christians, and I remember that distinct feeling that the Christianity that I grew up with just wasn't going to work anymore. Mm-hmm. Like eventually we were going to have to accept that humans evolved. We were going to have to accept that, we probably won't ever accept a supernatural explanation for the origins of the universe or the planet. We're going to have to accept that there's probably no life after death. And like, these were just present scientific realities. They're going to be very difficult to teach kids any differently. And so I remember this feeling of like I was holding on, trying to hang in there with Christianity, because I wanted to see what Christianity was going to become after. Like, what was Christianity going to look like once all of those things were accepted, right? And I eventually realized that I'm not under the impression that that's going to happen. I'm under the impression that it will continue to accept and accept and accept and accept more, mm-hmm. but it will eventually accept so much as to make itself redundant in the lives of most people. And so I think it will die a very slow, painful, and gradual death. And I think what he's talking to is the fact that people haven't, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're still in like this violent kickback phase where they're trying to silence people, right? They're trying to double down. They're trying to, make sure you sign your statement of faith, and hey, Derek, delete that video so I don't get screwed over in the job market, right? And, they're doing all these apologetic channels, right? I mean, look how hard they're pushing in new media, right? So I think what he's saying is we're not there yet. He's like, I see it. I see that this is totally dishonest. This is unacceptable. But
Well,
we're not there yet.
Dr. Miller, I get from this conversation he's having with Derek, isn't trying to reach a general audience. He's trying to reach a more academic, more specific one. I would say my mother's a Christian. I don't think she knows what the problems are. But my uncle, who's a minister, I'm sure he knows what some of the problems are. My aunt, who's in ministry as well, I'm sure she knows what some of the problems are. The people in the SBL, a lot of them know what the problems are. And the trick is reconciling faith. I'd say more than faith, reconciling actual belief, right? Because we can be pretty sure that there's no zombies running around after Jesus died on the cross, right? We can be pretty sure.
Right.
But the Bible says it happened. So someone like Mike Licona, who is trying to reconcile the two, because faith and belief are not the same thing. He's trying to reconcile the two, and he could be honest enough to say that's got a mythological core, perhaps. But all these other things, right, are still true. And I'm going to list some. I don't know that this is Licona's list, so I'm not crediting.
Right.
So things like Jesus walking on water, Jesus feeding the 5,000, Jesus feeding the 4,000, Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. Even though I can show you in Matthew chapter 5-7 what the Sermon on the Mount is, that it's an outline for what happens in the entire book of Matthew. It's like a literary trick. I was taught to do this in high school.
Sure.
So I can Mike Licona, someone like him, could say that, Jesus did all these things. He brought people back from the dead and so on, and be completely excited about those things as true events.
Yes, and they do that all the time.
Yeah, and he can't prove that it's true. So for some of those things, his faith has to do almost no work. Like there's no challenge there. It's just fine. Believing it, there's no challenge there. It's just fine. I accept all those things. In a way, when Christians say like they have a personal relationship with Jesus, part of me wants to laugh.
Yeah.
But I typically don't, because I know it's true. I know it's true. They've taken the Jesus that they've heard pieces about in sermons and in bits of the Bible they may have read, and that Jesus is an amalgam of their hopes, their dreams, their expectations, some belief, some faith, and there he is, perfectly formed in their mind, right? And I'd say even more than that, in their life. They've taken what they thought Jesus was and they apply it to who they are. And then they start applying it to you. They apply it to me. They apply it to the people in the grocery store, right? So that's, in my view, that's what's going on there. And that's why faith can be so strong. If that person begins to have actual expectations, that's when it can crumble. If you don't accept that this or that will happen in God's time, as I couldn't do that anymore, that's when it begins to crumble. My mother's going to have a surgery, a life-altering surgery coming up this week. And my brother and a friend of ours from our childhood and one of my other brothers were driving down to the hospital to be there for my mom's surgery. And somebody brought up Jesus as we were having this conference phone call. And I said, I don't think that Jesus will be lending a hand so that our mother doesn't need this surgery.
Right.
You can be sure. You can be sure she's already prayed about this and was not healed.
Right.
You can be sure.
Right.
But at 84, what else has she got to hold on to? But Jesus, right? That's the guy. That's her man. He's supposed to fix it, even though it will cost tens of thousands of dollars by people whose collective educations cost in the millions.
Yeah, right. Him fixing it will walk hand in hand with him not fixing it. With us fixing it. Yeah.
It'll look exactly like some doctors took care of things. It'll look exactly the same. Well, those are just instruments that God used to achieve the outcome. Then why did God use the people in billing to also achieve a separate outcome of making a hefty profit for the hospital? Right?
Yeah. And that's just the cognitive dissonance. All right, let's try to roll some tape.
The midpoint between that, if you were to create a bell curve of where all of the scholars might distribute across, on the spectrum between literalism between historical rigor and a faith, more of a faith approach, the midpoint between those two is not the answer. And so I find that oftentimes you go online or you see in articles things like mainstream scholars say this and that. That doesn't prove a thing. Mainstream scholars is midpoint between witch doctorism and actual medical science.
Right.
These are people that are in orbit around faith communities, living in a world that is still under the spell, Western world, still under the spell of these sacred texts, with students giving them student reviews based upon their faith. Why are they even taking the class? Because they think it's an easy A, because they were raised in the Christian tradition. And so when they show up to the class, they judge the teacher based upon how comfortable they were with what they got. And so
I'd be willing to bet
they're worried about their own student reviews. They're worried
people
about
don't get
faith-based
A's.
academic boards, a publication.
Oh no, no, they're wrong. They're usually wrong. But this is fire.
How do you?
Oh, good.
Yeah. Now, I'd be willing to say most students entering biblical studies struggle because there's finally, it's not what it means to you, it's history. It's what it actually means. It's digging into the Hebrew. It's digging into culture. This isn't Jesus from Main Street.
Right.
This is supposed to be, or Moses from Main Street, right? It's not what we've made them into. Biblical studies is, what were these characters or people? What were they meant to be? Who were they really? And those aren't the same questions, because a person might be real but put into a parable in order to communicate to the culture whatever particular lesson was hoped for, right? We hope people can learn this. We intend to indoctrinate people with the following things, but we must present them as truths, historical truths with eponymous ancestors, which we can't tell them that's how it is, but we want them to accept this because we need to effect the following changes in our changing culture in order to preserve our tribes.
Yeah, 100%.
Publish something like what I've published to a society that is still very much under the spell of these texts, is not interested in hearing them be what they find dear and comforting deconstructed. I understand why they find it dear. I sympathize even with it. But when I get to my academic work, I need to let go of all that and get rigorous and honest in its most pure form. And I want to be in conversation with others that are like-minded in that way. Not toward atheism necessarily, but toward answering these questions without the distraction, the hindrance, the arbitrary lines. Like, for instance, what is biblical Greek? What is that? I never heard of such a thing. Do you think that there was a distinctive use of Greek that only the New Testament authors were privy to?
That sounds like a category people do use, as if, like, I have heard it said that, these Jewish Greek-speaking, Greek-writing people, they were using things, but they didn't use them the same way. Like Hades in Revelation, that's not Hades, the Greek, Hades. That's a totally new kind of idea they're using in the Greek world to describe the Jewish concept of Sheol or something. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure there's some fusion that does take place when the Jews obviously are Hellenized, but
certainly, yeah. And you could say Sheol. Why did they even use the word Hades? Why did they translate it that way?
Right.
Well, it's because that's their analog, and so they're moving that direction. There's a whole world of stuff we can unpack with that particular puzzle itself. But I think that we need to get honest about where people are starting from, what their project is. If your project is to influence modern faith and constructs of theology, I don't want to talk. That's not the person I'm trying to be in conversation with in terms of my own work.
So if I can press you back, I want to press devil's advocate here, so that I can get you to maybe even nuance some of this so people understand. Yeah, but John J. Collins, Paula Fredrickson, as far as I'm aware, she's not a Christian. I could probably name a couple people that you would probably say find ways to speak at SBL. Collins's wife, Yarbrough, isn't it?
Adele Yarbrough Collins, yeah.
Like I can list some of these people who I would say aren't Christians, but they're finding themselves sometimes at SBL speaking, or they speak some of these places. What would you say if I was trying to bring back some pushback against what you said?
Oh yeah, no, I'm I'll let them speak for themselves to some extent here. I mean, maybe you'll have them on the show and they could talk about that. But from my perspective, I have a deep respect. I took classes with Adele Yarbrough Collins and John J. Collins and all those, and they are Catholic, from what I understood, in the loosest possible sense, probably. They do affiliate with that tradition in some way. But the students, you had priests in there and pastors and all sorts of people in there that have they're going on to be shaman in our society. They're not going on to be historians and secularists. They're going on to shape modern religious mythological constructs in the minds of people that are practitioners. And so let's not kid ourselves what's going on there. That's a divinity school. That's what's going on there. This isn't the place. Now, they're setting up shop there and they're finding their ability to have careers there, and I respect that, but that's not what I'm trying to do. And so I'm not interested in trying to help pastors become more effective in being pastors or anything like that. I have no interest in that project at all. I'm interested, just like the classicist, in understanding what the earliest Christians thought and what they were trying to do and how it would have registered in the ancient world, and then how now, as a humanist, this should best be processed in terms of our modern scholarly investigation of that. And so
this is kind of one of the things that emphasizing is what they're teaching. You went through this for well over a 2 decades of like going to school, doing this stuff as a Christian, doing this stuff as a Christian scholar, and getting to the end of the road, and you're looking back and you're seeing the journey you took, and you went, like, I could have cut out all of this and been right here toward the conclusion if I'd have started researching this from the beginning. Now, there's some stuff I'm sure you owe a debt to the idea that you've learned some stuff along the way that was valuable in your research of knowing what you know today. But would you say that you could have saved yourself a lot of time and money if you would have just gone to this? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I mean, let's start with had I been reared in this society to have those critical faculties from the jump, I wouldn't have gone on this big journey into delusion and trying to find my way through the labyrinth out of it at the other end.
Right.
I would have been, just like we understand Roman history and don't lose a lot of sleep understanding it, I would have had more or less the same ability to reflect on what the early Christians were doing and the early Buddhists. It would have been just another garden variety secular topic of investigation for my own humanistic kind of enrichment, had I done that. And I can't tell you how many books I've thrown away or given away that are no longer useful to me.
Yeah.
Meaning. That's what he's referring to. That's the holdup. That's why there wasn't a direct route, because of meaning. And for those who are Christians, when you are in conversation with non-believers or people from another faith, give that person some grace, right? Because what your faith means to you, it does not mean to them. It may not, like for me, I'm very respectful of people of other religions because I'm fascinated by them. So you're all lucky. You get more of my interest than any sarcasm or things like that, because it's fun for me to listen to the discussion. It's fun for me to listen to people discuss their faith, because I enjoy knowing, right? I'm a little anthropologist sitting there. I enjoy knowing the meaning and the function of what you are telling me. I'm not necessarily ever going to be interested in believing any of it. I'm impressed that you believe it, and often believe it as if it is without fault. So for him, clearly there was a lot of meaning there that elongated the process. He's right. If I'm reading about Chinese culture, I don't for 1 minute invest any truth into whether or not that there were, and same with Japanese, that there were dragons, right? I just gloss right over it. When they talk about a god of the sky or of the clouds or of the water, I gloss right over it. I don't give that any credulity. Again, the function. What was the function? What did this mean to them? And so as believers engage with non-believers, you have to understand where most of us will not be enchanted like I'm enchanted. Most of us will not be enchanted with what you're saying. And you have to understand that and just realize you may just have someone who's a really good listener and is enjoying the conversation with you, but has no intention of believing in God and Jesus and angels, and that Moses was able to win a battle because he sat on a hill and his brother and sister held his arms up while when he got tired. It's not that things like that are true.
Yeah, I also just think there's people like me because I want to make sure we try to get through some more of this, but a lot of us now are just going to have bad reactions. We're going to associate your story with your identity with a group, and we're more concerned about that group's role in society. And so, that's that. And I think that's the part people are going to struggle with. It's the association, right? Because they come beaming with the smile and the warmth because that's what they feel in their heart. But like you said, a lot of us don't feel that same way about it.
Yeah. I think a good thing to ask is, what is the takeaway? If you're on an airplane or whatever, actually don't do it on an airplane, because if you convince a non-believer that his ideas are rubbish, he might try to stab you with your fork or something like that. So it's fascinating. But a question would be, and I think I'll ask this from now on, what is the takeaway? As you are sharing this with me, what am I supposed to walk away with? And if the discussion is a scholarly one, I think that question's even more important, because if a person is approaching the Christian religion, let's say, from a scholarly point of view, and they still believe it, I really want to know what's going on in that person's head. If they're not a multimillionaire from it and they still believe it, sit next to me. Sit next to me.
I don't know. Yeah, they're just apologetics, man.
Because they are steeped in theological. They're theological projects. They're there's all of even the most distant participants in our discourse often are still, even unbeknownst to them, unwittingly often, still in orbit around that gravitational center of faith.
Yeah, that's why.
It's such a powerful influence.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to. There's too much at stake there. And so Pascal's wager, maybe we can get into that in another video, but that's a major part of this that needs to come into play that doesn't exist for other subject matters.
And the sunk cost fallacy.
What's at stake for society, culture, their own eternal destiny, their own sense of comfort and construction of their own identity? There's too much self-interest in this field. And in my view, that disqualifies nearly all of the participants. And so I know that's going to sound crazy, but I think that's honest.
So this leads to the final question in the scholarship issue. We pick up classics. I go to Yale. I want to go in the classics department. Just suppose I'm already an undergraduate. I'm already on my way up there. I'm going to do a PhD program. I'm going to be a classicist. I go into this and I'm going to pick up the study of ancient Greek, Roman mythology. There is no nexus surrounding some center gravitational pull of like Hercules really with him or without him, you never know, you can go to hell. But I want to know what the truth is about Greek and Roman society, the ins, the outs. There's really nothing about Hercules, Asclepius, anything Greek and Roman that is untouchable. There is no limit to what I could explore pertaining to classics. And so it's a fair, safe, go in. You don't have to deal with someone going, hey, Hercules really did jump on that pyre and actually did go to heaven. Nobody's arguing that in the classics department.
Right.
And so what would you recommend, since we talked about the problems and how we really cannot sit here and throw around consensus or like, I have 10 scholars who say you're wrong, because you could do that with evangelicals. And this happens in the discourse online with people I deal with. They list off, Craig Evans said, and N.T. Wright said, and William Lane Craig said, and so did the Lydia and Tim McGrew and all these Christian apologists. Look at all these scholars who said this. And then the other guys come in and go, well, Bart Ehrman said, and John J. Cullen said, and so-and-so said. And actually, I do think that they're closer to the reality of what's going on from that side. But what do we do? How do we solve this problem? Do we create a new department and focus on, this is non-faith, secular humanist studies on New Testament studies, and we're going to do it new and different, and we're not going to be in the communication with...
Just put it in the classics department.
Well, identifying this problem, first off, I want to say lots of times I'm perceived as on the radical far end of the discussion. Like, in fact, I even read, there was a blog or something that came out of a few days ago where it was like Miller and like a few of the, were kind of like pushed off to the margins, like just these wild, like desperados. Even Carrier, and he's, I understand, but he, the problem is that, yeah, we look radical to this discourse, what I would call the Big Ten or circus of nonsense. But if you get to the actual discourse, the human discourse, the secular academic discourse, we're smack dab in the middle. We are mainstream. Those guys don't want to go to SBL. They think it's a circus. And so they don't want to have any part of it. That maelstrom of belief and all of the loaded topics and all the charged kind of politics that's going on with that. And so I even brought up to Cusco, the former president of SBL, when I was more involved there, before I got completely frustrated. I said, why don't we have a checkbox at least, so that when people start sessions at the conference, they could indicate this is a purely secular session, or this is a purely evidence-driven humanistic kind of platform. Please do not, we do not invite, discussion that's aimed at theological constructs or anything that's motivated by faith whatsoever. Even if you were to announce that, people would show up and still import all of their beliefs and so on. Of course. So yeah, it's almost impossible basically to get out of that. Can I comment on I just decided that my discourse is going.
So, okay, he's making a good point. And I recently saw, I don't know how many people know about the Monster Energy can lady who was saying like, this is satanic and it's got 666 on the can, and okay, she's fascinating to listen to. She recently stood up while someone else was speaking, and spoke over them and was trying to reiterate how important that faith in the Bible was and that God is right, blah, blah, blah. We will not, it was a Muslim person speaking. We won't tolerate this, that sort of thing, which is hugely disrespectful. I'm not so sure God would be on board because it's the same God. But anyway, what people fear in this sphere of conversation, what people fear is that they will be made irrelevant somehow. Their position will be made irrelevant if they aren't heard out. Having some sort of, I want to say warning label, that's terrible. So let's just say checkbox as he did, but having some sort of indicator. The focus of this discussion of my presentation isn't faith-based. It isn't couched in the realm of faith. We are simply talking about the material in its cultural context.
No, you're right. Yeah,
and not how you feel.
Yeah,
it's not about how you feel. And what we get, and we see it in American society today, is people shouting at other people who don't share their faith, what their faith means. Or there was that, I saw some Aaron Ra videos where he was down at some satanic conference or whatever. And the Christians were arguing with each other. And this evidently is something that has happened more than once, where Christians disagree on doctrine. But I think the people going to SBL meetings should be adult enough to not take it there.
Yeah, but that's the problem. So you're right, but they're also right. And that's and the fact that they're even having this conversation is why biblical studies is a joke. Why it's Hogwarts. Because real academics we don't have to have these conversations. And this is not appropriate. And these people are going to be made irrelevant. And this is the message that the most of us, especially those of us that are non-believers, need to have the audacity. We need the audacity to look these people in the face and tell them, you need to get on board with the rest of us because you are making yourself. They're digging their own grave.
Outside of that, I take my hat off to those people that are still out there. A lot of them are orbiting so far out there, like the John J. Collinses and stuff, that they're still extremely informative to me and helpful, and I respect them.
But they also there's a place they've kept their career. Like you're suggesting that there would be no way to probably keep that career and do what you were doing and write what you're writing and actually teach what you're teaching here and keep a career at somewhere like Yale Divinity or Princeton Theological or any of these places. You would probably lose your job without a doubt.
Well, I haven't heard the phone call yet, and I don't know. I mean, I understand that maybe they see me as not qualified or something like that. I don't know what they're very selective and they only have openings here and there, and I'm probably not on their short list at this point. But just this kind of stuff, I mean, that's what they'd have to weigh through. Do we want somebody like this that's doing work that's so upsetting to so many people in a context where we're training ministers and clergy and clerics and this kind of thing? Is that where he belongs?
Yeah, I'd love to see scholarship, the institutions incorporate people like you to give people of faith at least knowing, like they do. They teach them things about contradictions. They teach them all this stuff. They don't preach that stuff. But it'd be at least in the right direction of letting them hear that discourse. Instead, you're not. So the final thing about that, I'd like to say, is you're suggesting that the people who think SBL and other societies like that are circuses, to use your words, is a big clown show of like circus. I have to emphasize that. So, is that these are probably classicists who see they don't want to wade into the storm of New Testament drama that goes on, even though they might see it actually categorized in that vein. It is a classicist thing. It is a Greek thing. It is a Hellenized thing that would fit right into classics and work perfectly. But because so much drama is attached to it, because we have a living religion still, whereas like there might be people out there who worship Zeus in the world or think Hercules is true. There is no systematic power. They have no power. There's so little in the world, so it's okay. Like they're
irrelevant to the discussion. Yeah, that's the opposite of the case here. Yeah.
So you're saying that's why the living religion has that much power, strength, and struggle that they don't even want to engage in dialogue because of this.
Yeah. I think that, and my doctoral work was transdisciplinary. I took a lot of classics courses. I had a lot of classics, professors over me, training me from various places, UCLA, Yale, the Claremont colleges, and other places. And so I was in those contexts, and I got to hear what the backroom discussions were at a lot of these places. And no, they don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They're not interested. Even the people that I got on my dissertation committee, it was a little bit of a struggle to get them to be part of it. And I thank them because their careers are now tied to my work in some way that they might not have signed on for that. They don't want to be part of being pulled into some apologetic debate with people throwing, mud and poop at them. And they've got dignified careers all in their own right, and they didn't sign up for that. And so it definitely spoils and ruins, and I think utterly destroys the discourse. The Greek lexicon, for instance, there's no such thing as a New Testament lexicon. It doesn't exist. There's no such thing as the New Testament in its own right. That's a construct that we're foisting upon it. This is just earliest Christian writing.
Okay, so last thing, I'm sorry I'm adding this on, but I think this is important what you're saying here. In your private discussions with classicists that come from the Greek, Roman research that they know some New Testament stuff,
Yeah.
Are they looking at this like you're looking at this? Do they see this stuff? I mean, I'm sure there's some people who have faith in classicist departments, but the ones that you're saying are secular, that are like obviously not engaging at all, are they looking at this going, this is another legend? Like this is obviously another one of them?
Yeah. There's mixed. I've seen that. I've seen a lot of that actually. Backroom discussions. I've shared my research at places. Some of the list I gave you with top people, and they'll look at it and say, yeah, you're correct. In fact, Veronica Grimm, who initially got me on my way to reading Romulus, I think in the back of her mind, later on talking to her, she said, I selected that text sort of at the beginning because I knew you were coming from the divinity school. And I thought you should maybe take a peek at that. And so they're quietly doing that it's kind of like I'm a proxy in that way. But, so those are backroom kind of ivory tower academic discussions that the world, the larger world is not privy to. There are others too that were trained to, because they're also trained to have that dividing line. And so some of them, their Christianity course that they take basically says, no, nothing to see here, move on. This is all Jewish. Mm-hmm. And so they're trained also to draw that line in the sand. And a lot of that line starts to, get disrupted as they begin actually doing their real work over time. And that's where I find these interesting and very honest discussions. So you, Robin Faith Walsh, Dennis McDonald, Litwa would be in this category at least, and you, of course, we'll get later into some of the criticisms of the recent work, how the Gospels became history and stuff. But these are people that we can say are at least engaging as fair and as close to what the reality is with this literature in a Greek, Roman, Jewish world. Yeah. Now that doesn't mean we're all right, but at least we're on the golf course.
Got it.
We're on the golf course. We're hitting the ball. Now, what's bizarre to me is oftentimes when you go to actual normal, what we would call mainstream New Testament studies, they think they're just on the putting green perfecting their discussion. This group that you're talking about, those that are doing true transdisciplinary work that's untethered to theology from a classicist, hybridic kind of perspective, we don't even think they're on the golf course. And so you might quibble about where we're at on this and that. I actually think I'm pretty damn close to right on this.
The original Tiger
about
Woods 99%.
My core argument is
video
I'm 1,000% confident in. Mm-hmm. Some of my ancillary arguments are up for discussion. And that's part of the discourse. This is like a science. We're going to grow and learn. No one's going to have the final answer on it, but we're going to advance in our understanding. And so that's where I think it's at. And I believe I've made a strong contribution in that way. But yeah, I think that basically you've got a group of people that are doing rigorous work in that space, trying to truly contextualize these writings within the world that they grew up, within the world that they found their initial meaning. And so I don't find that going on at a lot of the divinity schools and seminaries in this country.
Thank you.
I hope you liked my dad, Richard Miller, in this interview. Remember to like and subscribe, and never forget, we are Mythvision.
Oh, he's cute.
Kid Vision.
Kid Vision. All right, we made it. All right, so man, he was throwing bombs, man. I actually realized that was really important, man. This is one of the topics that I definitely have strong feelings about. Like, I really do feel like all of this legitimizing of the apologetics is really problematic. It's this sort of duplicitous apologetic industrial complex, and these institutions are feeding into it because they're still churning out church leaders, and it really goes against the reputation they're trying to establish as, scholastic institutions. And it's part of the reason I like working at a big public university, and I'm not at all I don't, pine over these sort of private institutions that are making all these other goddamn considerations. So weird.
Mm-hmm. Well,
But
the
yeah,
average
good.
minister the average minister that we could run into in a church or here on YouTube isn't participating in these arguments, and they don't want to. Now, here and there, they will have something to say that could be a remarkably point, but they don't go to the Society of Biblical Literature to make it. They say it in front of their congregation. Their congregation is already on their side, rooting with them. Obviously, they have a lot of respect for that person and that person's opinions. So it may be that that person has made the best argument ever, and the SBL doesn't ever know it. Or they're making the worst arguments ever, and they will tremble in fear of their opinions being critically examined in the SBL. But if the function of this or that group is to basically, okay, how do we make this last as long as possible? Well, then that's what they're going to focus on. You can't expect critical thinking in regards to whether or not the material is true. You have to expect critical thinking in regards to how to refine the process of continuing to get people to believe the stories that come from the religion or that are the makeup of the religion.
Yeah, and that's why, and this is why. Look, honestly, it's all a sham, and I think putting it in the classics department is fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably where it will end up. Under good circumstances, under the best circumstances, probably the criminology department. Multi-level marketing 101 type of deal.
It is that too. It is multi-level marketing. It is.
But yeah, it's crazy. I do think he hit right on about the way society is situated, and we're currently just living in a world dominated by this Christian identity and the dogma, but it's all very it's all very dishonest. And you wouldn't need people to sign statements of faith. You just wouldn't need any of this if you were doing honest work.
Mm-hmm.
You really wouldn't. But yeah, I'm really glad to hear someone that knows and someone that has the professional experience really start to expose this. I'd love to try to interview him or get in touch with some more scholars like this that can help us understand, because this is really, I think, important to your counter apologetics or your deconversion potentially, because most of us don't have the time, energy, or resources to compete with the biblical scholars. And a lot of us were raised by ministers and apologists. And even now, when you do your own research on the internet, it's very hard to make heads or tails of the legitimacy of the research. And so it's just really important for us to start to, it's almost like therapy, to start to realize that you're not insane and you're not crazy. And, there sort of is this conspiratorial, it's very mafia. The church operates like a mafia. Everybody's got to, or like secession, everybody's got to sign NDAs, and you can't go against the public narrative, and just it's an outgrowth of the religion. It's all about control. So yeah, and I hope he gets support from other scholars, and I don't know how you could see Derek is really somehow keeping up with all of this, but
he definitely enjoyed this interview. You could see he was really enjoying what he was hearing in the interview.
But I don't know how but he's been able to keep track of sort of who are the scholars that are more towards the critical approach and secular in their methods versus, who are the apologists, and it's all very impressive.
Well, the critical ones are, in my opinion, the best ones to listen to because they aren't serving you the same old hash. I've seen many sermons, many of us have, where you might, for weeks, you're just hearing the minister talk about his own life or her own life. And you're not really getting much out. They'll reference a few Bible verses, but you learn after a while, that's not why you've come. You've come to be a audience member in a Jerry Springer type audience where one person does most of the talking. So you sort of lose a feel for the material. But that person up there talking about their feelings knows this causes bonding with their audience and makes their audience, the congregation, more loyal. So, while they work through things, it's actually beneficial for them and their congregation in that way. But the critics, the Robin Faith Walshes and people who try to give you a different perspective on the same old material excite the mind, right? Because now you are asking yourself, why didn't I see that before? And you might go, like I do, you go flipping pages and go, look at that. These two pieces, they're 600 pages apart in your Bible, but now they make sense. Now they mean something. Like, again, like, why are the disciples fishermen? That's completely intentional. So there's always stuff like that in the Bible. In my view, that's what I've discovered. I don't want to say it's my opinion. It's a discovery, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to see these things.
Yeah, and if we're honest, these universities, biblical scholars programs, they're not producing scholars. They're producing preachers and ministers. And he brought out that nuance where sometimes you have a biblical scholar that has found the way to eke out a career by working at one of these institutions, but you can already see the problem because the institution's priorities is going to be maintaining their ability to produce ministers and theologians and apologists rather than actual scholars. So yeah, I think this is just another nail in the coffin of Christianity, and it helps us see that there's no there and that the biblical scholarship is in shams, just like the biblical church. Just like the church, All right, man. Let's wrap this thing on up. This was fun. I gotta get to church with my club. We'll have our gather. We'll be meeting gather. The game's on around 8, so I think we'll just meet and watch the game tonight. But and then we'll hang out watching TV. This was really fun though, and hopefully we can find more stuff. I know Richard and Derek did some other interviews, and we can find some more content. But yeah, I really enjoyed this episode, and for me
too.
Yeah, I think it's time for us to just add this to our toolkit. Is you're going to deal with family and friends that are Christians and believers. A lot of times when they do go to engage in these conversations, they are going to have their confidence bolstered by apologists and biblical scholars, and it's important that we're prepared to walk them through the issues with these scholars. Yeah, what you got? Anything to close this with?
I do, but sort of off topic. Big Wayne said, why is like his grandmother's bed in my room here? So yeah, this is old. I don't know how old this is, but I joked that there are other things in here like that butterfly over my shoulder. So I like mid-century things. So this is probably also in his grandmother's bedroom.
Oh.
It's small. It's actually a music box.
Oh, is it? And it works. Wow. All right.
Yeah, it works. So I'm gonna get the other thing. Hold on. I even have like some African influence. Hold on. This is what my one black friend cribs.
It's got to be it's got to be a
cribs.
mask. That's if it's like grandma, you gotta have
It's almost that. It's
the
almost
mask
that.
of the big vase. I'm actually a fan of music boxes. I think most of them sound really good. They're actually like percussion, right? They're very progressive. They sound close to like a glockenspiel.
I don't know how to make the music box stop. So just for you, Wayne, this is one of those
nice.
butterflies made out of strings or thread. It's probably not. If you have kids, this might be a fun little activity to do with your kids. And just pound little nails into a piece of cardboard and start wrapping it. This beautiful painting, is this from Georgia? I think this is from Georgia. So this is from an artist in Tbilisi, Georgia. Beautiful. And then for the African thing, I have another one of these, but it fell on the floor. So I have copied the style of his grandmother's bedroom. I even have a drawing in a gold made by one of my ex-girlfriends.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, what are you got some concluding thoughts here, so I got to get to my meeting.
Oh, for Hot Program in general, I would just say everybody just keep enjoying your life and be careful who you respond to on Facebook Marketplace because there's a lot of scams. Don't send money. Don't send money until you get your goods.
Be careful about which biblical studies program. I think Heathen Queen just got into a biblical studies program, but I'm sure it's one of the secular ones. So yeah, man.
Oh, interesting.
As always, gang, appreciate you guys. As always, come link up and gather. Be good to yourselves
and each other.
We'll